echo when we were talking
in progress.
Okay, Alan, you may have a continuing echo. No, it sounds pretty good now. Okay, so our Rabbi Alan Greenbaum of Temple Elohim used to say quite often that Judaism is the one true religion for Jews. And, it highlights the idea that Judaism does not seek converts, which is broadly true in our history. There was actually one point in history where Judaism not only sought converts, but would forcibly convert non-Jews to Judaism. And this was during Maccabean times, or the times following Maccabean, called Hasmonean times.
Ooh.
And one of the groups that was forcibly converted to Judaism were the Edomites, who I think, I might be getting this wrong, but they were the Idumeans. And one of the people who traced his Jewish history back to that time was King Herod. Speaking of things that may interest Jim, very insignificant king, both in Jewish history and Christian history. And, nobody likes King Herod. I think we can all agree on that. Nobody liked King Herod, although he was a great builder. He was the one who expanded the Temple Mount to broadly the state it was in when the Romans destroyed it. Was the builder of Masada and other great buildings. He was a great builder, but there was some question about whether he was really a Jew. So that we have this discussion from time to time about who is a Jew, and even back 2,000 years ago, there was controversy about whether Herod was actually Jewish, although he was king of Israel. And to get around that, he actually married a Jewish woman and had children with her. And because he was nervous about his children overthrowing him, I think he had his children killed, if I'm remembering it correctly. So he was a heck of a guy, Herod. And that, to my knowledge, that was pretty much the only time in Jewish history where certainly Jews went out and offered people death, the sword or the star. Although I don't think the Star of David was used at that time. But for most of Jewish history, to convert someone was a capital offense. Namely, if a rabbi converted someone, for most of Jewish history, both the rabbi and the potential convert would be subject to being put to death. This, true in Roman times, Christian times, Muslim times, other times. So that pretty much stamps out any tendency to encourage conversion. And as some of you may know, there is a tradition, if someone comes and wants to convert to Judaism, the rabbi is supposed to discourage them 3 times. And that actually is an inspiration taken from the book of Ruth, where Ruth's daughters-in-law want to follow her, and she actually discourages them 3 times. Naomi's daughters-in-law want to follow her, and she discourages them 3 times before she basically accepts the fact that Ruth is going to follow her. So Judaism doesn't run out and convert people. I always love to say you will never have anyone knock on your door with the good news about Moses. So then the question arises, which we're going to discuss tonight, and I think, again, many of you know about the Noahide laws, which is the subject of for tonight. But if we don't expect people to convert to Judaism, what do we want for non-Jews? And I think, I don't remember who said it last time, maybe it was you, Stephen, that said, leave us alone. And I once asked this question actually at the Western Wall Plaza. I got into a discussion with a traditional Jew, probably a Chassid, and I was talking about interfaith stuff. And so I said, so what should the non-Jews do? I mean, recognizing that Jews make up 0.2% of the world's population, there is 99.8% of the world that are not Jewish. So what should they do? And his answer was actually very similar, except he added, they should not bother us, they should serve us. So basically allow us to, to worship God, not only in peace, but in relaxation. And so I mean, I don't know, any of you have thoughts on this? I'll express one more thought, which sort of leads me to my interfaith work. But do you have any sense about what you were told either as kids or think about this question of what are non-Jews supposed to do according to Judaism? Yeah, Alan?
I have a question about the Noahide rules.
Yeah, well, that's going to be the subject, but go ahead.
We worded it. What are your question is, what do we Jews, what are we supposed to expect or do?
So the specific is, I guess I would pose it, if I think about it more carefully, what does God expect of non-Jews rather than we? I'm going to turn on my light because I can see it's starting to get dark in here.
Okay.
Nothing.
That's where I was going, was so the
Absolutely
so,
nothing. I don't think God has expectations for non-Jews. They didn't accept the commandments. We did.
So is your answer then God doesn't care about non-Jews? Has no
No,
expectations?
God cares about it, but God doesn't care that they don't follow the laws that we do.
the
Do
Noahide
you think God cares about the moral and ethical behavior of non-Jews?
Oh, yes, I do believe that.
Okay. Okay, then presumably there are moral and ethical laws that God expects non-Jews to follow. I would say that follows logically from
Yes.
God caring.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, finish, Alan, and then Bryce.
just the Noahide rules, which I always think of as a footnote at the bottom of the Plout book, but is it actually worded into the biblical text?
No, it is not in the biblical text. And again, the subject,
All right,
we're going to see it both. It is the rabbis tease it out of the biblical text, and it shows up in rabbinic literature. Bryce.
Wouldn't that be between God and the non-Jews? And in other words,
yes.
it isn't that for Jews to weigh in on what God expects non-Jews to do.
I understand that logic from the standpoint of enforcement. But in terms of theology, that's
in other words, an opinion.
Yes, I mean, and
Okay.
I would say the study of Judaism is in no small part the study of God's mind and what does God expect of us broadly. And so the question arises, that's the question. And as you'll see, we do have an answer in Jewish tradition. Jim.
Isn't the answer that I only have to follow 7 commandments or 7 laws that the rabbis came up with called that somehow connected to Noah?
Yes.
And that's it. And you guys have to follow 613 plus thousands more that the rabbis came up with.
Yes.
Which poses the obvious question.
Yes.
Why convert?
Yes. Yes. And that's next time I need to discourage someone, I'm going to send them to you, Jim. And in fact, there is an argument that one can make that conversion is hazardous to your spiritual health, and conversion to Judaism, sorry, and you can raise the argument, which you've just done a nice job of, that it may. Well, we'll see the question: is it hazardous to your life in the world to come? Because as you've stated it, and you stated it pretty well, and we're going to get into the Noahide laws, but according to Judaism, God judges non-Jews based on 7 commandments, and God judges Jews based on 613 commandments in the Torah, first 5 books. The good news is about half of them don't apply to us outside of Israel. Some of them only apply in the land of Israel. such as letting the land rest for the seventh year and so on. And many of them relate to how you do sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem.
Which we
And
don't.
since there is no temple in Jerusalem, we don't have to worry about those. But about half are still there. So figure 300 or so. And then you're absolutely right. The rabbis add thousands more, such as, kosher slaughtering, the holiday of Shavuot, the holiday of the rules about keeping the Sabbath, the details and so on. So you can argue you're better off not being Jewish, which is a very good reason not to seek converts.
I
But
wasn't arguing that, by the way.
no,
I feel about you guys.
I understand. And so, but it actually underlines for me what I think is a point, that the Jews who remain, I would say, actively Jewish, and the people who convert to Judaism have I will describe it as an internal spiritual impulse to be connected to God through Judaism. And I would say it is super rational. I won't say it's irrational, but I would say it's super rational. The mystics would say they have a Jewish soul, and that Jewish soul just longs to be connected to God. And it doesn't, it doesn't necessarily follow absolute rationality. That would be sort of a mystical insight.
Sounds like St. Augustine said the same sort of thing. That my soul is restless until it rests in thee.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so I'm going to share screen. And we have this article. I presume you can see it. This is from my Jewish Learning, the Noahide Laws. So would someone like to begin to read?
Well, I guess I'll read, Rabbi, if nobody
Thank you.
wants it.
Thank you.
In the 9th chapter of Genesis,
Yeah,
we
actually,
read,
just read the intro too.
oh, okay. 7 commandments, which according to Jewish tradition are incumbent upon all of humankind. In the 9th chapter of Genesis, we read this. God speaks to Noah and his children as they exit the ark. Behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. Although rabbinic texts preserve various traditions about the details of the covenant, the Talmud reports the following. The children of Noah were commanded with 7 commandments to establish laws and to prohibit cursing God, idolatry, illicit sexuality, bloodshed, robbery, and eating flesh from a living animal.
And then there are 7 sections. So Sanhedrin 56a would actually be in the Talmud. Tosefta, I think, is a commentary in addition on Talmud, and a Genesis Rabbah would be Midrash. So let's go through the 7 laws.
The laws. Do establish laws. 2, don't curse God. 3, do not practice idolatry. 4, do not engage in illicit sexuality. 5, do not participate in bloodshed. 6, do not rob. And 7, do not eat flesh from a living animal.
So it's 7 don'ts, thou shalt not, and 1 affirmative one, which I've always heard described as the obligation to establish courts of justice. Okay, let's get into the details.
The details.
Hold on 1 second, Alan, go ahead.
So I noticed it doesn't say, can you just scroll down a bit? It doesn't say monotheism. It just says no adultery, right?
That's what it said. I mean, actually, may want to take a quick look. If I can do this quickly.
I'm just
a quick look at Sanhedrin 56a. Whoops, I just realized the problem is knowing where it is. So
it's our 2nd amendment or something that says there won't be any other gods. That's not a restriction in these rules.
No, it's you shall not have any other gods before me.
Let's just focus on what'd you say? Sorry.
I said in the 10 Commandments, it's you shall not have any other gods before me. It's not you shall not have any other gods at all.
Yeah, it actually says literally al panai, which can mean before me. I like the literal translation, in my face. And then it says, don't bow down to them and don't worship them. Oh, it says, don't make any graven images and don't bow down to them and don't worship them. And so there's an argument about if you're not making any graven images, why do you have to say don't bow down to them and don't worship them?
Well, it could be
And-
one somebody else made.
I'm sorry?
Well, you can't. It could be one somebody else made.
Well, I mean, or you can do a sculpture of, you know, of a tree, of a person. But as long as you don't bow down and don't worship them, that doesn't violate the commandment. And that's basically where the rabbis come out. They don't prohibit art or sculpture. Whereas in Islam, there's a very strong restriction against making images of certainly of people. So anyway, let's not get into that. But yeah, you're not allowed to do blasphemy or practice idolatry. Let's see. Let's read about the details. That's the beginning
details.
right here.
The prohibition against idolatry refers specifically to idolatrous worship and not to beliefs. In later generations, Jews had to determine whether the prevailing religious cultures in which they lived were idolatrous. Since Islam is strictly monotheistic, Muslims have always been considered Noahides. Since the later Middle Ages, Jews have acknowledged that the Christian doctrine of the Trinity was not the same as idolatry, and they were also recognized as Noahides.
And so the phrase Noahide refers to the idea of the 7 commandments to the children of Noah. Remember, Noah is 10 generations before Abraham. So Noah has a separate covenant. And what the rabbis are trying to figure out is what's the covenant with Abraham? Because it says Noah was, you know, a righteous person in his time. So the question is, what was it about Noah that was righteous? And this issue with the issue was whether Christianity was monotheistic. And the interesting discussion there is, in rabbinic law, you're not allowed to do business with presumably idolaters or polytheists. And it's not a form of discrimination, or at least it may turn out to be. But the logical origin of that rule is, if you do business, let's say you're buying wheat from somebody, and he has weights and measures. In effect, you are asking him to swear that his weights and measures are honest, or he's giving you an honest product for your money. So if the person is an idolater or a polytheist, you, Mr. or Ms. Jew, is requiring him to swear by a false god, and you're not allowed to do that. So the issue becomes serious, particularly in the case of Christianity, about whether Jews are allowed to do business with Christians. And in the middle, this actually came up when I was working on my thesis. It was a subject that was of interest. And it's in the Middle Ages that the rabbis start coming over to the idea that Christians are monotheistic. And of course, the issue is the Trinity, is whether Trinity makes Christianity polytheistic. And Islam, you know, is in its attitude toward God is very similar, almost, I would say, identical to Judaism in terms of the God of Abraham. Okay. Joanne, you want to continue with this prohibition?
Okay. The prohibition against theft includes kidnapping, cheating an employee or an employer, and a variety of similar acts. The prohibition against illicit sexuality includes 6 particular prohibitions derived from a single verse. Noahides are prohibited from engaging in 6 illicit sexual relationships with one's mother, with one's father's wife, with another man's wife, with his sister from the same mother, in a male homosexual union, and with an animal, as it says, therefore shall a man leave his father. This refers to his father's wife, and his mother refers to the mother, and cling to his wife, and not another's wife and not a homosexual union, and become flesh, excluding animals.
Okay.
Eating flesh from a living animal is how the rabbis understood, but flesh with its life, which is its blood, you shall not eat. It has been suggested that the custom of eating an amputated limb of an animal was a way to keep the rest of the meat fresh in the days before refrigeration.
I'm assuming that animal lovers would not refer to this. But you know, well, I guess salting and smoking is another way of keeping. Jerry, you don't like this very much. Okay, veggie burgers for Jerry.
The obligation to
Sorry.
create a
Whoops.
system.
Sorry.
Oh, the obligation to create a system of laws. According to the medieval philosopher and codifier Maimonides, the legal system which Noahides are required to set up is specifically to establish punishments for infractions of the other Noahide laws. Noahimides, a medieval
It's Nachmanides.
Nachmanides, a medieval Bible commentator, understands the obligation more broadly. In my opinion, the laws which the Noahides were to establish according to their 7 commandments is not only to establish courts in each town, but that they were also commanded concerning theft, abuse, usury, labor relations, damage, loans, business, and the like, just as Israel was commanded to set up laws in the matters of Nachmanides.
In these matters.
In these matters.
Yeah, and it's not Nachmanides commentary on Jerry. See, yeah, there's a tradition of referring to rabbis as a nickname, and so Maimonides is Moshe ben Maimon, so they shorten it to Maimonides. Nachman, I can't remember Nachmanides' full name. He was like 14th century. Maimonides, I think, is more like 11th century, 10th, 11th century.
In 600 years, what nickname will they use for you?
The Zuma Rebbe. Okay.
Okay. Later authorities, including Rabbi Moses Suffer, claimed that Maimonides did not exclude what Nachmanides had included, but that Maimonides considered all of these laws to be included under the prohibition of theft. Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin states that Nachmanides' approach requires non-Jews to legislate on these matters, but the details and formulation of the legislation are left to their discretion. Natural law. The Noahide laws bear a striking resemblance to a separate rabbinic tradition that describes the commandments that would have been derived logically, even if God had not included them in the Torah. You must keep my rulings. These are the items which are written in the Torah. Had they not been written, should logically have been written, such as the prohibitions against robbery, illicit sexuality, idolatry, cursing God, and bloodshed.
And this is a subject I reflect upon a lot. One of my teachers, Larry Kushner, talked about 3 different categories of Jewish law. And there is a different Hebrew name for each of them, and I can't recall which one goes with which. But he said there's a category, and these are examples, where if God hadn't given us these laws, we could have figured them out ourselves. Thank you very much. We could probably figure out that robbery and murder and bloodshed and so on are probably not good things to do. Then he says there's another whole set of category where if we hadn't been ordered so by God, we would have never figured them out ourselves. But having been told to do this, we recognize their brilliance. And the example he mentioned, and I always mention, is Shabbat. We would have never figured out Shabbat until we were commanded to observe it. But now that we're living in a world where there is Shabbat, we understand how brilliant it is to have one day in 7, to have a day of rest, reflection, and so on. Then he says there's another category of laws where not only wouldn't we have figured them out, we still can't figure them out. And my favorite one, of course, is shatnez. You're not supposed to wear a garment made of wool and linen. Or the prohibition against eating chicken parmesan. I understand you don't want to cook a baby goat in its own mother's milk, but that shouldn't apply to chickens. And Larry would say these are the sweetest laws of all, because we do them not for any rational or self-serving purpose, but we do them purely for love and appreciation of God. And so that sort of, you like that?
Yeah.
And the example, which you'll also like, Jerry, I know, is my late wife, Carol, who you knew, loved yellow roses.
Yes.
And I don't know why she loved yellow roses, I could try and convince her that, daisies are just as yellow as yellow roses, or red roses are just as beautiful and fragrant as yellow roses, and probably a lot cheaper and more available. And but of course I didn't do that. She loves yellow roses. I love her. I give her yellow roses. God asks us, and this is certainly not in the reform world, but don't wear a garment made of wool and linen. Don't, carry an object more than 4 cubits on Shabbat, and all kinds of cover your head, put on these strange things on your arms, and so on. We don't know why. We still can't figure out why, but out of sheer love and appreciation to God, we do these things. Jim.
Baruch Hashem.
Do you think the rabbinic tradition is correct that without the Torah or anything close to it, we would have figured this stuff out all on our own? Because we know there was long periods of time and huge, vast numbers of people that simply thought, if you're weak and I can take what you have, that's better for me. So that ipso facto is what's right.
Well, so I think we felt that way about the tribes of others, not within our own tribe.
Oh, yeah.
And there certainly is altruistic behavior. So, we can debate that, and, I can ask Cheryl to weigh in on it. But basically, there is this concept of natural law that we probably could have figured out ourselves, versus other kinds of laws that would never occur to us. And Shabbat is one, and wearing a garment mixed with wool and linen is certainly another one. Let's see. I think, are we here at the overlap? I actually
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Why don't you continue?
All right, the overlap here of 5 of the 7 laws enumerated for Noahides indicates that they have been understood as a sort of universal, natural morality. This is the way some modern philosophers, such as Hermann Cohen, understood them. Indeed, based on the Talmudic discussion, Maimonides states 6 items were commanded to Adam concerning idolatry, blasphemy, bloodshed, illicit sexuality, theft, and laws. God added to Noah the law of not eating from the flesh of a live animal.
One thing which I should observe, and these laws, the Noahide laws, don't pop out of the text. It really takes the rabbis digging in. What do we mean when the text says man and woman become one flesh? What is God talking about there? Do we then extract all these other rules? That's what rabbis are really good at, extracting lots of laws from some simple text. Why don't you continue there, the association?
The association of these laws with Adam implies that they were established as part of the creation of the natural world. Laws for non-Jews under Jewish rule. A conversation in Tractate Sanhedrin assumes that Jewish courts should enforce the Noahide laws. Therefore, later authorities, most notably Maimonides, understood these laws as describing what Jews should require of non-Jews living under Jewish rule. Since Maimonides saw revelation as the clearest form of reason, it would be folly from his perspective for non-Jews living under Jewish rule to rely upon their own inadequate reasoning powers to determine law when they have access to the superior reasoning of revelation.
So let me just pause for a second. Non-Jews living under Jewish law is purely theoretical, dating from about the year 70 to the year 1948. You didn't have non-Jews living under Jewish law. So both in the Talmud in Sanhedrin and Maimonides interpreting what's in Sanhedrin, it's purely a theoretical question, not a practical question. Bryce.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that very thing. That one of the things that is the basic comment about Jews that have to live under the laws of others is leave us alone. But the idea then that Jews would have an idea that if someone were living under their law, that you're going to interfere and tell them how they should live, which is I don't know, strikes me as a little bit of a conflict.
Yeah, but the idea that what Jews require of non-Jews is to leave us alone is sort of my take and this guy I met, his take. It's not part of Talmud. What Talmud is going to say is the 7 laws of Noah. And then the question is, should we enforce them? And I think what probably the Talmud is saying and what Maimonides is saying is, yes, if we have control of other people, we should set up a system of justice not only for ourselves but for non-Jews enforcing the Noahide laws. And I've never heard that in Israel any Israeli civil law is based on these concepts. I could be wrong about that. Alan.
So I wanted to go back to Rabbi Kushner's 3 categories,
Mm-hmm.
specifically the one about we could figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And the we could figure it out sounds like helping us understand the difference between individual and community. And so behavior, which I believe is this idea that as we move from Genesis to Exodus, we were taught that Exodus is at least begins as a book that helps us explain how to create a community and a society. And so I'm questioning that we would figure it out in the way in which God intended, and that's why we have Exodus and other, things.
So you're saying the laws in Exodus that you're referring to, and I've never heard the concept. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I've never heard the concept that Exodus is about creating community.
Society. But even ignoring Exodus for a second, this part we could figure it out. I'm being a little let's say just playing devil's advocate that we might not be able to figure it out.
Yeah. So the question is are those laws in category 2 or category 3?
2 being the one where
2
we
being
could.
the ones we. Oh, I'm sorry. Category 1 or category 2? Category 1 is we could have figured it out. Category 2 is we wouldn't have figured it out, but we appreciate it now that we have it.
Yeah, 2 is my.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any formal distinction between those laws, that put them into one category or another.
Okay.
Or if there is one, I'm not aware of it. Bryce.
Actually, I forgot what I was going to talk about listening to this. I'll come back.
Okay. How about yeah, so we're down here indeed according to Maimonides.
Indeed, according to Maimonides, it is unacceptable for non-Jews living under a Jewish authority not to accept the Noahide laws. If someone from the other nation wants to convert, they may, as it says, the law is the same for you for a stranger. But if they do not want to, we do not compel them to accept the Torah and the commandments. Moses did, however, command in the name of God to compel all people to accept the Noahide laws.
So this is Maimonides' take. And Maimonides, was a premier law author of a law code. That law code is called the Mishnah Torah, not to be confused with the Mishnah, which is only took me 10 years to figure that out. So Maimonides, writing much later, 1,000 years after the Mishnah, roughly, basically puts together a code of law. Because if you're trying to figure out what is the law on different subjects, you have to have an encyclopedic knowledge or a copy of the entire Talmud and understand the commentaries on the Talmud or the commentaries in the Talmud to allow you to derive these laws. That's unusual for most rabbis and individuals. So there arises, and Maimonides is noteworthy of this, of codes of law where scholars like Maimonides go through the Talmud and understandings of Jewish law and basically state the law simply. And Maimonides is noteworthy because he was so confident of his conclusion that he didn't even cite chapter and verse to support himself. He just stated what the conclusions are. The latest, well, I won't say it's the latest code of law, but probably the only code of law that's as famous as Maimonides is called the Shulchan Aruch. And I always think of it as being so important because it's the first code of law that is published after the invention of movable type. So then every community could have a copy of the Shulchan Aruch, and not only rabbis but knowledgeable Jews could have a copy of the Shulchan Aruch, and it gets spread very, very widely. Bryce.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is kind of implicit in this discussion is the idea, and especially with would we have figured it out? Would people have figured it out without God giving us the laws, or would people not have been able to do so? And the idea is that people just are just not going to be able to figure it out without God stepping in. And it's so very, very European, North African centric. Okay, because you go all over the rest of the world where they've never heard of Noahide or anything else, and they have laws.
Yes.
They have come up with laws on their own, and those laws work in their environment for them.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by the category 1. And what they would refer to early in the article as natural law. That we really didn't need God to tell us this. We would have figured it out on our own. And many cultures, as you point out, have these kinds of laws. They probably don't have the Sabbath and restriction on work and narrow things like that. They have other laws, but they probably don't have a specific restriction about milk and meat. So for Jews, those laws are given to us by God. And we might infer logic behind them with some difficulty. And then there's some other laws that we still can't figure out why we observe them.
So that leads to a question. If God has given all of mankind the Noahide laws, and if people fail to conform to the Noahide laws, even if they don't know them, okay? Because presumably they are natural and given by God, and everyone should just know it implicitly.
Right.
Is God going to punish those people in the Pacific?
Yeah, so that's going to get to the question, who has a share in the world to come? Or who gets to go to heaven? That's kind of where we're leading as the punishment. So the understanding is, to be very specific, if someone steals something from someone, or someone murders another person, even though they've never heard of the God of Abraham, is that a wrong about which God cares? So the presumption is yes. And as we'll see, the issue is having a share in the world to come. So let's continue.
And also defining what murder is in any particular culture too. That's, I think, other cultures where man, where Western man has not penetrated, have their own rules about this.
Yes, but the presumption is just a mean-spirited taking of someone else's life is against natural law. There are probably cultures in which it's okay, or it can be a ritual thing, but the presumption, at least by this logic, is there are some rules that we just know to live by. You can argue that they're a consequence of Darwinian evolution. Alan.
Okay.
You have muted, Alan. Still muted.
Okay, sorry. You may come to this, so defer if you want. But on this subject of the world to come, for this to be relevant to an individual, they have to believe that there is a world to come. And then if you're not going to get the benefit of it, say you do believe it, then what are the consequences of not behaving in a favorable way as suggested by this topic?
Yeah, so this presumes, again, if we were living in a world where Jews have legal authority over non-Jews, then presumably Jews could exercise that legal authority by saying, you have to obey these 7 laws of Noah, or we'll put you in jail. You have, I mean, that's a possibility. Since we don't live in such a world, we can argue that if you don't obey those rules, we believe that you will not have a share in the world to come. You may not believe in the world to come, so it may make no difference to you at all. So none of these laws, I would say, are enforceable, and haven't been for about 2,000 years,
Thank you.
assuming they even existed 2,000 years ago. Okay, I think we're at the top here, Maimonides'
Yes,
approach.
okay. Maimonides' approach, however, is much disputed among the classical commentators. Some interpreters of Maimonides have argued that he meant to obligate the Jewish court, but not individual Jews, to compel non-Jews to comply with the Noahide laws. Others had argued that the entire issue is irrelevant until the days of the Messiah. Nevertheless, it seems clear that Maimonides intended that whenever it was possible to compel observance, Jews should make an effort to do so. Other medieval authorities, rather than attempting to reinterpret Maimonides' statement, simply disagreed. Rabbi Abraham ibn Dodd clearly rejects an obligation to compel observance of the Noahide laws, even in a situation where Jews have subjugated non-Jews in war. This seems to be the opinion of Rashi, Tosafot, Nachmanides, and Rashba as well. In dealing with individual non-Jews as employees or slaves, none of the legal codes, aside from Maimonides, mentions an obligation to impact Noahide laws or to punish non-Jews for violation of the Noahide laws. By way of contrast, when Jews are likely to sin, other Jews are obligated to try and prevent that sin through intervention and education. In general, in modern times, no such obligation is mandated towards non-Jews who violate the Noahide laws. A notable and forceful exception is the opinion of the late Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the last leader of Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim. Schneerson wrote, "We must do everything possible to ensure that 7 Noahide laws are observed. If this can be accomplished through force or through other kinder and more peaceful means through explaining to non-Jews that they should accept God's wishes, we should do so. Anyone who is able to influence a non-Jew in any way to keep the 7 commandments is obligated to do so, since that is what God commanded Moses, our teacher."
When I wrote my book, which is A Christian's Guide to Judaism, and I mentioned this to friends of mine who were Chabad rabbis, their focus was absolutely, did you stress the 7 Noahide laws? That's what they were interested in. And I'm embarrassed to say, and if I were doing it again, I would have talked about the 7 Noahide laws, but I didn't even mention them in my book. Alan.
So this Schneerson's thesis, which has its own logic, assumes the people you approach to help people understand what Schneerson wants you to understand, that they believe in God, believe in a higher being. And so he doesn't cover that for the people who don't believe in God, because there obviously are lots of people who don't believe in God.
So what Schneerson is saying is Jews are obligated to get non-Jews to obey the 7 Noahide laws. And it says through force or other kinder and more peaceful means. I mean, that to me is an alarming statement. I don't think Schneerson cares, or not, I wouldn't say he doesn't care, but I don't think Schneerson is considering whether they believe in God or not. As long as you don't commit blasphemy or worship idols, your belief in God is okay with the Noahide laws. You just don't commit murder, sexual impropriety, establish courts of justice. Your reason for doing it is not necessarily important.
Okay, but my point is that as we looked at these laws themselves and this idea of monogamy, not monogamy, but monotheism, this whole thing, I think Schneerson makes an assumption that I would agree with your statement if you would just take out the implication that you have to believe in God in order to sell this point. Because you can sell this point, Michael, which you just said, but Schneerson implies otherwise, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Bryce.
Well, what Schneerson, at least according to the quote, I don't know if this is actually an accurate representation. At what point does Schneerson accept a Jew violating a commandment to force a non-Jew to obey the Noahide laws?
Yeah,
You
I don't.
threaten someone with force and violence, and do you carry through the violence upon them to make them do this? I mean, this is so dangerous. I can't comprehend it.
So I'm not aware of any focus of Chabad to either by violence or anything else to encourage people to obey the 7 Noahide laws. There actually is a movement. Maybe I'll talk about this next time. There are Noahides. There are organizations who state that their religious practices obeying the Noahide commandments. And you can Google it, but I'm not, for the most part, I think Orthodox Judaism is inwardly focused. Orthodox Judaism is focused on what Jews do, not what non-Jews do. And these are more theoretical discussions in the world of Orthodoxy, excuse me, rather than, practical things. You don't find Chabadniks going door to door, knocking on doors with copies of the 7 laws. I mean, if you took this literally, I agree with you, Bryce. At a minimum, we should be going door to door, saying, "Are you Jewish?" No. Well, we know you're not Jewish because there's no business on the door. So I just want to give you the good news about the 7 Noahide laws. The good news is, don't worry about 613. It's only 7. Mazel tov. Go and live in peace. Yeah, Jim.
Just before the conclusion, could you talk about not cursing God? Because and what would be an example of a violation of that commandment, and why is that so important to Jews that non-Jews?
So the example, and again, I don't know, I can't with confidence give an example from the Noahide perspective, but what I will give an example of is, again, this is Maimonides who says, I think it's Maimonides, who says that you set aside obedience to any Jewish law except 3 counter examples. Murder. So if someone says, I want you to murder those children or I will kill you, you are to submit yourself to be killed before committing murder. Sexual immorality, raping, incest, and so on. And public blasphemy. So if someone holds a gun to your head and says, I want you to deny God and pledge your allegiance to Christianity or totem pole, Buddhism or something, or I will kill you, then you are to surrender your life rather than committing public blasphemy. So my guess is that that's the kind of thing they're talking about here. And, as I've mentioned a couple of times, there are cases from the Holocaust where people could presumably save their life by having a forged baptismal certificate and basically declaring that publicly they are not Jewish. And they've been baptized and they've rejected their Judaism and they've become not Jewish. The rabbis in the Holocaust, these were in the camps, said, no, you should go to your death before doing that. And as you know, people were burned at the stake, in Spain. They were offered the choice of convert, leave, or die, and some chose to be put to death rather than doing the others. So my guess is that's the kind of public blasphemy we're talking about.
Okay, and that would just be publicly. If somebody came to you all by his lonesome, and there's nobody there, and he holds the said gun to your head, you could say, no, I don't believe, because nobody else is, because it's not public.
That is my understanding of it. Okay, so let's read the conclusion and then we'll take a quick look at some of the text.
That Jews perceive non-Jews as bound by a set of laws, even if they are not bound by the full range of Torah law, is a significant statement. The expectation that non-Jews will set up their own system of justice became the basis for peaceful interactions between Jews and non-Jews. The Noahide laws separated humanity after the flood from the lawless violence which brought God to the point of destroying the world. The Noahide laws stand as a testament to the Jewish belief in the need for the rule of law to protect all peoples.
So I'm going to fairly quickly go through this text. I presume you can see it, Gentiles in the world to come.
Yeah.
So the world to come generally is a euphemism for either heaven, what happens to us after we die. It's also used as a euphemism of what will things be like with the coming of the Messiah, the so-called eschaton, if that word means anything to you. So I'm just going to read through. There's not a lot of material here, but I'm going to read through it because you'll see the issue of Noahide laws. So a commentary on Sanhedrin 47. Any Noahide that we have seen has accepted upon himself the 7 Noahide laws, is one of the righteous people of the world, and is included in the category of religious people and has a share in the world to come. And the most common expression of this is here in the Mishnah Torah. So this is Maimonides. The righteous of the non-Jews have a portion in the world to come. That's in one section. And in another section, whoever accepts the 7 commandments of Noah and is careful to observe them is considered one of the pious members of the nation and has a portion in the world to come. However, this is true only if he accepts them and observes them because God has commanded them in the Torah and had Moshe inform us about them. However, if he keeps them purely because of his intellectual recognition, he does not have the status of a ger toshav and is not considered a sage. So that kind of addresses Bryce's point, but we remember that a lot of people disagreed with Maimonides. Let me read just a little more and we can discuss this. And so here's just a mention of the 7 laws: idol worship, desecrating God's name, murdery, I've never heard it used as a word before, sexual impropriety, stealing, eating flesh from a live animal, creating a legal system. That which it says here in the Mishnah, all of Israel, even though we established that also the righteous of the world to come have a share in the world to come, and even the Benonim among them have a share in the world to come. The Benonim are the people that are neither all bad or all good. Even without the bold words, I guess that word is, of our sages who told us this, that pious Gentiles merit Olam Haba, the world to come, we would know this from our intellect because God is just in all his ways and benevolent in all his deeds. We see that many pious Gentiles recognize the Creator, believe in the divinity of Scripture, act compassionately toward Israel, and some have done great things for the entire world. Gutenberg invented the printing press. Some of them never received their reward in this world. And yeah, that's
Your printing press for Gutenberg came from the movable type.
Movable type, yes. I really appreciate knowing that because I try to be careful in mentioning that. So the main point here is, one of the things that upsets many people about certain Christian movements is the idea that if you're not on board with our set of beliefs, you're going to hell. And it's a real issue with certain converts that I work with, that in some cases, their parents, their spouses, some cases their children, believe that by converting, they're going to hell. And in some cases where you have someone converting, let's say before marriage, and are going to raise children Jewishly, I've spoken with converts that have come from a fundamentalist Christian background, and one of the real problems for them is that their mom and their dad and grandma and grandpa believe that not only are they going to hell, but even more painfully, their grandchildren are going to go to hell and can't get into heaven. And so contrasting this is the Jewish teaching that basically the righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come. And, if you ask me what the details are, I will give you my familiar response, which is God knows. We leave that to God to sort out. But the important point theologically is you don't have to be Jewish to have a share in the world to come. That you have to be righteous. And what do we mean by righteous? Well, the Jewish answer to that are the 7 Noahide commandments. Okay, any final thoughts before I let you?
Could you go over what I think it was Maimonides said that if they accept these because God said them, then they have a place in the world. But if they accept them not because of God, but because of their intellectual
Yes.
honesty, then they're not
Oh,
something.
Yeah, I'll share the screen again. So yeah, he says, I think you can see it. It's true only if he accepts and observes them because God has commanded them in the Torah. However, if he keeps them purely because of intellectual recognition, he does not have that status. And I would say Maimonides is not the final word in Judaism. And particularly on these issues, he is not necessarily dictating what is a consensus belief in Judaism, if there are indeed consensus beliefs in Judaism. Because remember, this is not going to affect what I do tomorrow. But Maimonides is coming from, it's almost an Aristotelian logic that the highest form of logic and insight is Torah. And therefore, it's important to Maimonides that we recognize that this is not coming from just contemplating our belly buttons, but understanding Torah. So I would say for Maimonides, Christianity and Islam have no issues. What would he say about, righteous Hindus? I don't know. I'm not sure he was even, that much exposed.
But what's a ger shtova? And if you're a ger
Oh,
shtova,
ger toshav. A ger toshav, the word ger in biblical Hebrew means stranger. Toshav means a citizen. So a resident alien would be the biblical understanding of the term ger toshav. In rabbinic Hebrew, which I don't think Maimonides is referring to here, a ger is someone who converts to Judaism. But I think to use the phrase ger toshav means a resident alien. The understanding is, in the book of Exodus, there were lots of non-Jews that were also basically hanging out with the Jews. But that's what that term means.
so in that
So
last sentence,
oh, sorry.
Hold on a second. Go ahead, finish, Jim, and then.
Yeah, just what that last sentence. If he keeps them purely for intellectual recognition, is Maimonides saying that by not being a ger shtova or considered a sage, they still go to heaven, or why is that important?
Yeah, I think Maimonides is talking about who has a portion in the world to come. So, without focusing so much on the details of the language, he says, Ein zeg ger toshav. That's what this is. So it's a good translation. And the Chasidei, the pious ones, Umrot, the pious ones say, the pious ones of the world say, he is not mechach mehem, among the chachams. I mean, if you know Yiddish or Hebrew, you know that he's not a sage. He's not a wise person. So Maimonides in this section, I would say, is arguing that people that obey the 7 laws of the children of Noah, just out of their own sense of what's right and wrong, not acknowledging that they come from God, don't have a share in the world to come.
Oh, okay.
That's what I think Maimonides is saying. I don't necessarily agree with that. Basically, my attitude on all of this is God knows. And, I mean, I think people should behave righteously. Do I think non-Jews should obey the Sabbath, should keep kosher? No, I don't think there's any reason for a non-Jew to obey the Sabbath or to keep kosher. Should a non-Jew not commit murder, sexual crimes, cruelty to animals? Yes, I would say non-Jews should not do that. Bryce.
So implicit in this is Maimonides' assumption that there are no people that do not know the Torah.
No,
You
I
see?
don't think it's
Well, of
implicit.
course, because what he's saying is that someone that does not know the Torah and yet lives righteously has no share in the world to come.
Right. I think that's what he's saying.
Yes.
I don't agree with it, but I think that's what he's saying.
I understand that. I just
Okay.
I've lost respect for him.
Maimonides is arguably one of the most brilliant people that ever lived. You may not agree with each and every one of his laws, but the fact that he, while simultaneously being a court physician, wrote an extensive commentary on the entire Bible, on the entire Talmud, and put together this incredibly complex code of law while still earning a living. This was his part-time job, is an impressive feat. So while I would pose it as saying, while I don't agree with everything that Maimonides said, I still have tremendous respect for him.
I had the utmost respect, and it's just slightly less than utmost.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. And any other thoughts or comments?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
Okay, so is there a description of what a share in the world to come is referring to? It sounds like something that's going
Yeah,
to.
I probably ought to research that. But basically, there's clearly a sense in, remember, Judaism is not a religion of proper belief. So there is a sense that good people, that you have good people and bad people in this world. And what happens doesn't seem to be just. You have bad things happening to good people, and even more annoyingly, good things happening to bad people. And so the question is, how do we reconcile this with a just God? And one answer is that the payoff is in the world to come. So there's all kinds of fanciful discussions about what the world to come is like. There's absolutely no consensus. But there is a strong sense in the literature that your share in the world to come is affected by how you live your life.
So where I would like to have the other discussion is what if I end up in the afterlife, it is assumed, how would I benefit to getting a share? Is more specifically, like would I get health and shelter and those kind of things?
So there is a commentary, you may be familiar with it, that says that your position in the world to come, whether you're at the higher levels, whether you have a super palace, whether you have a crummy log cabin, details not explained, but your position in the world to come, the position of someone who has sinned and repented, is in a better position than someone who has never sinned.
There is wording in the morning blessings that I can't retrieve, but you'll be able to do that. It talks about in a sense, the interest versus the capital of your in the world to come.
Yes, it says there are certain mitzvot that you get benefit in, that you get paid. I think I can't remember now whether it's the interest in this world, but the principal is stored away in the world to come.
Opposite of what my logic, but it's that subject.
Yeah, but it's this idea. It's called Elu Dev. The prayer is Elu Devarim.
And this
These are
doesn't
the
violate
things.
prohibition against interest.
What? No, as long as you don't charge interest to somebody else, Stephen, you're fine.
Very good.
So rabbinic literature is filled with allusions to the world to come, and mystical literature is also, maybe I'll do that. When I did the mythology class, I think I have a class on the world to come. Maybe I'll just review that. That would be a fun one to do. But none of it you have to believe. You know, one of the things that fascinates me about religions that are based on proper belief, such as many of the movements of Christianity, have explicit details on what the heavens are like, and whether you have a guardian angel. And I remember my Catholic priest friends tell me they no longer teach this in the catechism, but I remember working with a convert who, when she was a young Catholic, was told, like, for this sin, you get, 6 hours and 14 minutes in purgatory. And it was at that level of detail. And for me, that was mind-blowing, because how do they know? So that's, for me, one of the things I like about Judaism is based on proper actions, not proper beliefs. And you can believe whatever you want to believe. And but we don't have detailed beliefs about the world to come. I mean, we have lots of details, but there's no
consensus.
There's no dogma. There's not only no consensus, but there's no dogma. To be a good Jew, this is what you must believe about the world to come. Absolutely not. To be a good Jew, you're supposed to obey Jewish law.
Rabbi, I thought the world.
Unless,
hold on a second, Maxine. We haven't heard from you. Go ahead.
And I thought that the world to come is going back to Gan Eden, where Adam and Eve left. They left Gan Eden, but we're going to go back to Gan Eden. It's there.
Yes, so that's one of the ways the world to come is described. And in fact, you may know that quite often cemeteries are called Beit Gan Eden, the house of the Garden of Eden, because there's this sense that the Garden of Eden was paradise, and what could be a better description of the world to come as being going back to Eden. And that's one belief, and there's lots of other beliefs, and you can pick and choose, and do whatever you want, but don't you touch that cheeseburger. Bryce.
Yeah, so it's interesting, the concept that Judaism is a religion not of proper belief, but of proper behavior.
I would say the focus is
the focus, yes.
Yes.
But what's interesting is that Maimonides' pronouncement that we just went over is an exact contradiction of that.
He is saying that about the issue of whether non-Jews have a share in the world to come is
Yes.
based on the reason for their behavior. I agree
Exactly.
with you. I agree with you that that's a contradiction.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that Maimonides would agree with the idea that Judaism is just a religion focused on proper behavior and not on proper belief. I would say many Jews would say Judaism is both. And of course, in the extreme, if you don't believe in God, in divinity,
Then why behave?
then it is natural that you wouldn't necessarily follow the laws. Although again, there's a rabbinic discussion where a rabbinic student goes to his rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I'm having a crisis of faith. I'm not sure I believe in God. What should I do?" And the rabbi says, "Keep putting on your tefillin, keep praying 3 times a day, keep being kosher, and your belief will return." So I would say Judaism emphasizes proper behavior, but it's an overstatement to say that it doesn't address proper belief. Matter of emphasis. Okay, so I'm gonna beg off for the evening, and so we're done with this topic. I was just glancing at some files I tried to recover from Carbonite about things to discuss next week, and one thing popped up, and there's a subject: tattoos. What exactly is prohibited? I think it's a fun subject. So
Yeah.
see you next time.
I'll be gone 4 months in Israel and 3 Wednesdays. Wednesdays.
Yeah, Nasiya Tova.
I'll try to come in.
Maybe it was in Talmud that we said that as long as it has to do with beautifying, it was
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, Jerry. That's what we're going to discuss.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, there is response, Jerry, on what if you do medical tattooing to for a medical problem.
Anyway, I
I
found a nice
have
article.
it.
I haven't actually studied
From
it, but
cancer, they had to tattoo me.
yeah, yes. And so we'll read about it. Don't
Which
worry.
is necessary to save your life if you're getting radiation treatment, and they have to make sure they do it in the right spot.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. Okay, but we'll discuss it. We're not going to discuss it tonight.
No problem.
So thank you all, and see
Thank you,
some of
Rabbi
you on
Michael.
Shabbat, some of
Good
you-
night.
Happy
Good night,
Shabbat,
everyone.
and again,
Toda.
second day of Shavuot.
Enjoy your cheesecake.
Okay, thank
Right.
you.
Thank you very good.